said it's longer than the boat. And the boat was almost like 32-footer, end to end.
When Steven Spielberg created Jaws, he terrorized audiences with his fictional great white shark. But Alaska's icy waters harbor something that makes that movie monster look like a minnow. This terrifying creature has been attacking boats, straightening massive steel hooks, and dragging entire float planes across an Alaskan lake for decades. Pilots have seen them. Fishermen have hooked them. Native tribes have feared them for centuries. Alaska's version of Jaws exists, and after what happened in 2017, we finally have proof that these Jaws are real and bigger than you imagine. The lake that swallows secrets. Lake Iliamna stretches across Alaska like an inland ocean, covering over 1,000 square miles of dark, mysterious water. To put that in perspective, you could drop the entire city of New York into this lake and still have room for Los Angeles. At its deepest point, the water plunges nearly 1,000 feet down. That's taller than the Eiffel Tower. And in some spots, researchers have dropped weighted lines for over 1,300 feet without ever hitting bottom. This lake holds more water than 15 Loch Ness lakes combined, and it's so remote that the only way to reach it is by float plane. No roads. No easy escape if something goes wrong. The water stays eerily cold year-round, hovering just above freezing even in summer. Scientists who study the lake describe it as having two distinct personalities: the surface layer, where salmon spawn and seals hunt, and the deep zone, a pitch-black world where the pressure would crush a human body and where temperatures never change. Between these layers lies what researchers call the thermocline, a mysterious barrier where warm and cold water meet, creating perfect hiding spots for creatures that don't want to be found. Here's where things get strange. Lake Iliamna connects to the ocean through the Kvichak River, a waterway that allows marine animals to swim upstream. Beluga whales have been spotted in the lake. Harbor seals have established a permanent freshwater colony here, one of the only populations like it on Earth. If whales and seals can adapt to this freshwater environment, what else might have made the journey from the ocean and decided to stay? Local pilots who fly over the lake daily report seeing shadows moving under the surface that are too large to be salmon, too fast to be seals. These shapes appear and disappear so quickly that by the time pilots circle back for a second look, the water shows nothing but ripples. One pilot, who's been flying over Iliamna for 23 years, keeps a camera mounted to his plane's dashboard. He's captured something on video 17 times. Each time, the footage shows the same thing: a dark mass, longer than his plane's 20-foot pontoons, moving with a side-to-side motion that no known Alaskan animal exhibits. The indigenous Tlingit people have a name for what lives in these waters: Gonakadet. Their ancestors carved its image into totems, a creature with the head of a wolf and the body of an orca. The Aleut people call it Jigiknak, and their oral histories warn that it hunts in packs, capsizing boats and dragging fishermen into the depths. These stories have been passed down for over 1,000 years, long before any modern sightings, long before planes flew overhead. But ancient stories are one thing. What happened in September 1942 changed everything, because for the first time, credible witnesses saw exactly what Alaska's version of Jaws looked like up close. The pilot who saw too much. Bush pilot Babe Allsworth had flown over Lake Iliamna hundreds of times, but on that September morning in 1942, something made him reduce altitude. Flying his Stinson ferry plane with passenger Bill Hammersley, a seasoned fisherman who knew every species in Alaskan waters, Allsworth noticed dark shapes near an island in the middle of the lake. At first, he thought they were logs. Then the logs started moving. Allsworth banked the plane hard, spiraling down from 1,000 feet to just 300 feet above the water. What he and Hammersley saw next would haunt them for the rest of their lives. Below them, several dozen creatures swam in formation. These things were massive, each one longer than the plane's pontoons, which measured 15 feet. Their bodies were thick and cylindrical, colored like dull aluminum, with heads that were blunt and squared off, completely unlike any fish either man had ever seen. The creatures moved their tails side to side, not up and down like whales. This detail mattered because Hammersley had spent years on fishing boats and knew that whales surface every few minutes to breathe. These things never came up for air. For 10 minutes, Allsworth circled lower and lower while the creatures swam in perfect synchronization, like submarines on patrol. Then, as if responding to some silent signal, they all dove simultaneously, disappearing into the black depths within seconds. Hammersley couldn't sleep for weeks afterward. In 1947, after leaving his defense job, he published an article about what they'd seen, hoping other witnesses would come forward. And they did. Larry Rost, a U.S. Coast and Geodetic Survey pilot, admitted he'd seen a 20-foot aluminum-colored fish in the lake in 1945, but had kept quiet, fearing ridicule. Another pilot, flying a mail route, reported seeing 4 massive fish swimming in diamond formation, each one the size of a small whale. The sightings multiplied. By 1959, the reports had become so frequent that oil tycoon Tom Slick, who'd previously funded expeditions to find Bigfoot, arrived in Alaska with a team of researchers. Slick hired Allsworth to fly him over the exact spot of the 1942 sighting. They hovered in a helicopter for hours, scanning the water with binoculars. Slick even tried something extraordinary. He had his team lower a massive steel hook, thick as a man's thumb, baited with chunks of moose meat, attached to aircraft cable that could support 2,000 pounds. Something took the bait. Whatever grabbed that hook was so powerful it snapped the aircraft cable like a fishing line. The steel hook, when they recovered it weeks later after it washed ashore, had been completely straightened out. Engineers who examined it said the force required to bend it that way exceeded 3,000 pounds of pressure. No known fish in Alaska could generate that kind of power. The question was no longer whether something lived in Lake Iliamna. The question was, what could possibly be that strong? When giants surface, Tim Laporte had been flying over Lake Iliamna for 15 years when everything he thought he knew about the lake changed in an instant. On a calm day in 1977, flying just a few hundred feet above Pedro Bay with 2 passengers, one of them a Michigan fish and game official who'd come to Alaska specifically to investigate the stories, Laporte saw something that made him question his own eyes. A creature lay motionless at the surface, its massive back breaking the water like a submarine coming up for air. Laporte estimated it at 14 feet minimum, but what happened next proved this was no ordinary animal. As the plane's shadow passed over it, the creature made what Laporte described as an arching motion, like a cat stretching its back, then dove straight down. Not at an angle like a whale or seal would dive, but perfectly vertical, as if the lake had no bottom to stop it. The tail, and all 3 witnesses agreed on this, moved side to side as it descended, visible for almost 30 seconds as the creature went deeper and deeper. The Michigan official, who'd spent 30 years studying freshwater fish, later said he'd never seen anything that could match what they witnessed. He filed an official report, though it was sealed and only recently released through a Freedom of Information Act request. That report contains one line that researchers find particularly interesting. Creature displayed behaviors consistent with deep water adaptation, suggesting permanent residence rather than temporary migration. 10 years later, in 1987, Verna Kolyaha was checking her fishing nets near the village of Iliamna when she saw something that made her abandon her boat and swim to shore. A black shape, easily 25 feet long, circled her boat 3 times. She described seeing a white stripe running down its dorsal fin, a detail that would reappear in multiple sightings over the next decade. Her nephew, watching from shore, confirmed her account and added another detail. The creature's skin looked scarred, with parallel marks running along its side as if something with massive claws had attacked it. Then came 1988, the year of the mass sighting. 17 people, both on boats and standing on the shores of Pedro Bay, watched 3 creatures surface simultaneously. The largest, witnesses agreed, was over 30 feet long. They moved in coordination, diving and surfacing together, hunting the salmon runs. One witness, a marine biologist visiting from Washington State, managed to take 3 photographs before the creatures disappeared. Those photos, though blurry, show dark shapes that experts say are too large to be any known species in Alaska. But nothing compared to what happened in 2017. The village of Kokonok reported something that challenged everything. Multiple creatures, the largest estimated at 60 feet, were seen blowing water into the air like whales. Actual footage exists, though the quality makes definitive identification impossible. These sightings raised a terrifying possibility. Whatever lives in Lake Iliamna might be breeding. The hunt that changed everything. In 1979, the Anchorage Daily News made an announcement that sent shockwaves through Alaska and beyond. $100,000 for anyone who could provide proof of the Iliamna Lake monster. Within days, the remote lake became ground zero for what locals called monster madness. Boats equipped with sonar, diving teams with underwater cameras, and even a submarine arrived at the lake. One team brought military-grade hydrophones capable of detecting sounds from 20 miles away. Another group tried playing classical music underwater, theorizing that the creatures might be attracted to specific frequencies. What they found was both disappointing and terrifying. The sonar repeatedly detected large objects moving at depths of 600 feet, but every time they tried to investigate, the objects vanished. The hydrophones picked up sounds that marine biologists couldn't identify, low-frequency pulses that seemed to be communication between multiple sources. The submarine, on its third dive, reported contact with something that bumped it hard enough to damage the hull. The pilot surfaced immediately and refused to dive again. Chuck Crapuchettes, a missionary who'd lived near the lake for 20 years, decided to take a different approach. He attached heavy-duty tuna hooks to steel cables and secured them to his float plane's struts. Using caribou meat as bait, he drifted on the lake's surface, waiting. What happened next nearly cost him his life. Something grabbed the bait with such force that it yanked the plane sideways, throwing Crapuchettes into the water. The plane was dragged almost 2 miles across the lake, while Crapuchettes swam desperately for shore. When he finally recovered his plane, 3 of the 4 cables were gone. The remaining cable's hook, designed to hold a 500-pound tuna, had been straightened completely. The monster hunters tried everything. They used underwater explosives to force creatures to the surface. Nothing appeared, but dead fish floated up from depths suggesting the blast had reached areas over 800 feet down. They dragged nets that could catch whales. The nets came back shredded, with tears that suggested something had bitten through steel mesh. They even brought in a psychic who claimed she could communicate with the creatures. She lasted 1 session before leaving the lake, refusing to say what she'd experienced. Jeremy Wade, host of River Monsters, arrived with a full production crew and cutting-edge equipment. His investigation uncovered something remarkable: tooth marks on damaged propellers that didn't match any known species. The marks suggested teeth over 3 inches long, arranged in rows like those of a shark, but with a crushing force similar to a crocodile. Wade's conclusion? If the Iliamna Lake monster exists, it's either a giant sturgeon, which can grow over 20 feet, or something completely unknown to science. Despite millions of dollars spent and thousands of hours invested, no one claimed the prize. But the hunt revealed something crucial. Lake Iliamna's ecosystem could theoretically support a large predator. The salmon runs provide abundant food. The depth offers protection, and the connection to the ocean means creatures could have entered the lake thousands of years ago when sea levels were different. The hunters left empty-handed, but they'd proven one thing. Something in that lake really didn't want to be found. The science of terror. Marine biologist Bruce Wright has spent the last decade applying hard science to the mystery of Lake Iliamna, and his findings are genuinely disturbing. Using underwater cameras positioned at strategic points around the lake, Wright has captured thousands of hours of footage. Most show nothing but salmon and seals, but 17 recordings show something else entirely. Shadows too large to be any known species, moving with a purpose that suggests intelligence. Wright's leading theory centers on Pacific sleeper sharks, massive predators that can grow over 20 feet long and live for centuries. These sharks have been found in Arctic waters and possess a unique ability. They can regulate their body chemistry to survive in both salt and fresh water. If sleeper sharks entered Lake Iliamna thousands of years ago when the lake was still connected to the ocean, they could have adapted to the freshwater environment over generations. The science supports this. Their slow metabolism means they need less food than other predators their size, and the lake's salmon population could sustain a small breeding group. But there's a problem with the shark theory. Sleeper sharks move slowly, almost lazily, earning their name from their sluggish behavior. The creature's witnesses describe move fast, aggressively, displaying hunting behaviors that don't match sleeper shark patterns. Wright discovered something else that complicates the picture. The lake contains areas where the water chemistry changes dramatically, creating pockets where the laws of physics work differently. Sound travels strangely, light bends at unusual angles, and electronic equipment malfunctions. These zones could hide almost anything. Environmental DNA sampling, a technique where scientists analyze water for genetic traces left by organisms, has revealed something unexpected. The lake contains DNA from at least 3 unknown species, not just variants of known fish, but completely unidentified genetic signatures. One sequence shows similarities to both sharks and sturgeons, suggesting either hybridization or convergent evolution, where unrelated species develop similar traits. The most compelling evidence comes from an unexpected source: earthquake data. Seismographs positioned around the lake to monitor tectonic activity have recorded rhythmic disturbances that don't match any geological phenomenon. These patterns suggest something large moving through the deep water in regular patterns, possibly following migration routes or hunting territories. The size required to create these disturbances? At least 40 feet long and weighing several tons. Wright's team has also documented unexplained fish die-offs in specific parts of the lake. Hundreds of salmon found dead with identical wounds, circular bite marks that don't match any known predator. The spacing between tooth marks suggests jaws over 4 feet wide. Even more disturbing, these kills appear strategic, targeting the largest, healthiest fish while leaving smaller ones untouched. This selective hunting indicates intelligence, not just instinct. Recent thermal imaging from drones has detected heat signatures in the deep water that shouldn't exist. Cold-blooded creatures shouldn't generate enough heat to register, yet something down there is several degrees warmer than the surrounding water. Marine biologists have only one explanation. Whatever's down there is either warm-blooded or so massive that its metabolism generates detectable heat. Either possibility rewrites what we know about Lake Iliamna. Ancient warnings. The Tlingit elder sat in his home overlooking Lake Iliamna, his weathered hands tracing patterns in the air as he spoke about Gonakadet. His grandfather's grandfather had seen it, he said, and the story had been passed down through generations with one consistent warning: never fish alone when the water turns black. The creature, according to oral tradition, rises from the depths during specific conditions, when the northern lights reflect off the water, when the salmon runs peak, and when the lake's surface becomes perfectly still. These indigenous accounts, dismissed for decades as mythology, contain details that modern sightings consistently confirm. The Tlingit describe Gonakadet as having multiple rows of teeth, skin that changes color from black to gray, and the ability to generate whirlpools that can sink canoes. The Aleut stories of Jig Iknok include specific hunting patterns. The creatures work in coordinated groups, driving fish towards shallow water where they're easier to catch. Witnesses in 2017 observed exactly this behavior. The indigenous names themselves contain clues. Gonakadet translates roughly to water wolf or beneath surface hunter. Jigiknok means that which takes quickly. Both names suggest predatory behavior, speed, and danger. Traditional songs, still performed in some villages, include verses about staying away from certain parts of the lake where the old swimmers congregate. These forbidden zones match exactly with modern hotspots for sightings. Russian fur traders, arriving in the 1790s, documented their own encounters. One journal, discovered in Moscow archives in 2003, describes losing 3 men who were dragged from their boat by fish the size of trees. The Russians eventually avoided Lake Iliamna entirely, marking it on maps with symbols typically reserved for dangerous waters containing sea monsters. They traded with indigenous peoples for passage around the lake, rather than crossing it. Perhaps most compelling are the behavioral rules passed down through generations. Don't splash excessively. It attracts them. Never clean fish over deep water. Blood draws them from the depths. If you see one surface, leave immediately. Others are nearby. These aren't mythological precautions. They're survival strategies developed over millennia of coexistence with something dangerous. Modern investigators have started taking these traditional accounts seriously. When researchers positioned cameras and sensors based on indigenous maps of creature territories, their success rate for detecting anomalies increased by 300%. The ancient knowledge, it seems, was based on careful observation, not imagination. The message from history is clear and consistent across cultures. Something has lived in Lake Iliamna for thousands of years, and our ancestors learned to fear it for good reason. The Vanishing investigators. Not everyone who goes looking for Alaska's version of Jaws comes back with just stories. Some don't come back at all. Since 1950, 17 people have vanished on Lake Iliamna under circumstances that remain unexplained. Their boats are found drifting, sometimes damaged, always empty. Search teams find no bodies, no signs of struggle, nothing to explain what happened. The official reports list these as drowning accidents, but details in the files tell a different story. In 1962, 2 researchers from the University of Washington disappeared while conducting a sonar survey of the lake's deepest sections. Their equipment was found on their boat, still recording. The last 20 minutes of audio captured splashing sounds, a metallic scraping against the hull, and then silence. The boat's aluminum side showed deep gouges that investigators couldn't explain. The marks were tested and found to contain traces of calcium phosphate, the same compound found in teeth. A Japanese documentary crew arrived in 1999 with sophisticated underwater robots designed to explore ocean trenches. On their 4th day, they reported finding something extraordinary, a cave system at 700 feet that showed signs of habitation. Large bones, too degraded to identify, littered the entrance. They sent a robot inside. The camera feed showed a tunnel extending beyond the range of their lights before the signal cut out. When they tried to retrieve the robot, the cable had been severed cleanly, as if cut by something sharp. That night, something struck their boat hard enough to crack the hull. They left the next morning and never released their footage. Mark Thompson, a commercial diver with 20 years of experience, was hired in 2008 to investigate damage to fishing nets near Pedro Bay. He made 3 successful dives, reporting nothing unusual, except the water felt wrong. Too warm in spots where it should be cold, with currents that didn't match the surface conditions. On his 4th dive, at 200 feet, his surface team lost contact. When they pulled up his safety line, it ended in a clean cut. Thompson's body was never found, but his underwater camera washed up weeks later. The memory card was corrupted, but technicians recovered one image, a blurry shape with what appears to be an eye larger than a dinner plate. The most recent incident occurred in 2021. A team of biologists conducting a fish population survey reported via radio that they'd spotted multiple large creatures surfacing near their boat. They were sending video evidence, they said. The transmission cut off mid-sentence. Coast Guard found their boat 6 hours later, capsized but intact. Their equipment was scattered across the lake bottom in a pattern that suggested the boat had been spun in circles before flipping. All 3 biologists were missing. Their waterproof camera was recovered, but the footage it contained has been classified by federal authorities who won't explain why. These aren't stories of mechanical failure or weather accidents. Something in Lake Iliamna defends its territory. The truth surfaces. After decades of sightings, lost investigators, and classified footage, the evidence points to a reality more extraordinary than any single theory. Lake Iliamna doesn't harbor one mysterious creature. It's home to an entire ecosystem of unknowns. The DNA evidence, the varied descriptions, the coordinated hunting behaviors all suggest multiple species or a single species with extreme variation. But here's what makes this truly terrifying. They're getting bolder. Sightings have increased dramatically since 2015. Where witnesses once reported glimpses of single creatures, they now describe groups. The 2017 Gonakadet event involved at least 6 individuals, possibly more, Fishermen report nets destroyed nightly, boats bumped hard enough to crack hulls, and propellers damaged beyond repair. Here's what we know for certain. Lake Iliamna contains something that grows over 30 feet long, exhibits intelligent behavior, can damage steel and aluminum, hunts in coordinated groups, and has successfully avoided definitive identification despite decades of searching. Whether it's an evolved population of prehistoric sharks, giant sturgeon adapted beyond recognition, or something that entered from the ocean and transformed in isolation, the Iliamna lake monster, Alaska's version of Jaws, is real. The indigenous peoples were right all along. Their warnings, preserved through millennia, tried to tell us what science is only now beginning to accept. In the vast wilderness of Alaska, in a lake deeper than we've fully explored, creatures exist that challenge our understanding of what's possible. They've been there longer than human memory, and as climate change reshapes their world, they're making their presence known. So what do you think lurks in Lake Iliamna's depths? A prehistoric survivor or something completely unknown? Drop your theories below, and don't forget to subscribe for more incredible mysteries.